Her name was Hisako Hasegawa. She was 50 years old, riding the Chiyoda line toward another ordinary Monday morning, when a man she had never met set a plastic bag of nerve agent on the floor and stabbed it with the tip of an umbrella. She would not survive the ride. March 20th, 1995. Tokyo, rush hour. 5 trains, 5 attackers, all converging on Kasumigaseki, the station beneath the heart of the Japanese government. By the time the morning was over, 14 commuters were dead, and more than 5,000 were poisoned, and the man who ordered it was a nearly blind yoga teacher who believed he was the reincarnation of Shiva. This is the story of how a tax-exempt religious order built a chemical weapons program in plain sight, and how the Japanese police hesitated until the bodies hit the floor. The guru's name was Shoko Asahara. Born Chizuo Matsumoto in 1955, partially blind from infancy, he grew up in a school for the visually impaired in Kumamoto, where teachers remembered him as a bully who extorted lunch money from weaker students. He failed the entrance exam to Tokyo University. He ran a fake pharmacy peddling tangerine peel as a miracle cure and was fined for it. And then, in the mid-1980s, he reinvented himself as a holy man. He grew his hair long, he grew his beard longer, he sat cross-legged in white robes and claimed he could levitate. There are photographs of him in midair, knees folded, eyes closed, suspended over a cushion. The photographs are not evidence of flight, they are evidence of jumping, but people believed. He called his movement Aum Shinrikyo. The sacred syllable. Shinrikyo, the teaching of the supreme truth. He blended Hindu cosmology, Tibetan Buddhism, Christian apocalypse, and a heavy dose of science fiction, and he sold it to a generation of Japanese young people who had grown up inside the country's economic miracle and found it spiritually empty. His earliest converts were not the poor or the desperate. They were chemists, physicists, doctors, engineers from Waseda and Kyoto and the University of Tokyo. The students who had won the exam wars and looked around at their corporate cubicles and asked, "Is this all there is?" Asahara told them no. He told them the world was ending, and he had been chosen to save the worthy few. In 1989, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government registered Aum Shinrikyo as a legal religious corporation. That registration came with tax exemptions, with privacy protections, and with a strong reluctance from Japanese authorities to interfere with anything labeled a religion. Japan, after the militarist abuses of the 1930s, had built its post-war legal culture around protecting religious freedom. Asahara understood this. He used it as armor. Inside that armor, he built an army. By the early 1990s, Aum had tens of thousands of followers in Japan, and a satellite operation in Russia with even more. It had front companies, it had a record label, it had a chain of cheap noodle shops, and it had a sprawling compound at the foot of Mount Fuji called Kasumigaseki, where buildings were given numbers instead of names. Satien 7. Inside Satien 7 was a chemical plant. The plant was designed to manufacture sarin. Sarin is a German invention from 1938, a colorless liquid that paralyzes the nervous system by jamming the enzyme that lets muscles relax. A droplet on the skin can kill. A breath of its vapor can kill. The Nazis stockpiled it but never used it on the battlefield. Saddam Hussein used it against Kurdish civilians at Halabja in 1988, and in a warehouse outside Tokyo, a doomsday cult was trying to make it by the ton. The chief chemist was Masami Tsuchiya. He had a graduate degree from Tsukuba University. He was by all accounts brilliant. He synthesized the precursor compounds, refined the process, and produced enough sarin to kill, by some estimates, millions of people. Asahara also had Hideo Murai, an astrophysicist, running production. He had Seiichi Endo, a virologist working on biological weapons, including anthrax and botulinum toxin. He had a former heart surgeon named Ikuo Hayashi. He had the chemist. He had the money. He had the legal shield of a religious corporation, and he had already killed. In November 1989, an anti-Aum lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was murdered in his apartment, along with his wife and his one-year-old son. Sakamoto had been organizing families whose children had been pressured into giving the cult their assets. Aum members strangled all three and buried the bodies in 3 separate prefectures. An Aum lapel pin was found at the scene. The police did not pursue it seriously for almost 6 years. In June 1994, Aum carried out a rehearsal. In the city of Matsumoto, cult members released sarin from a converted refrigerator truck in a residential neighborhood. They were trying to kill 3 judges who were about to rule against the cult in a property dispute. The judges were hospitalized, 8 other people died, hundreds were sickened. The local police, baffled by the chemical signatures, initially suspected a man named Yoshiyuki Kono, a resident whose wife was among the wounded. They leaked his name to the press. He was hounded as a mass murderer for months, while Aum chemists went back to Sachin 7 and got better at their work. By early 1995, the police were finally closing in. A raid was being planned, Asahara knew. He moved first. On the morning of March 20th, 5 teams left the Aum compound carrying 11 plastic bags filled with sarin and sharpened umbrella tips to puncture them. Each team had a perpetrator and a getaway driver. They had been chosen for their loyalty and their intelligence. Ikuo Hayashi, the heart surgeon, was on the Chiyoda line. Kenichi Hirose, a graduate of the Applied Physics program at Waseda, was on the Marunouchi line. They wore surgical masks and carried newspapers wrapped around the bags. At 8 a.m., across the 5 trains, they dropped the packets on the floor, jabbed them with the umbrella tips, and walked off at the next station. The sarin began to spread. On the Hibiya line, passengers reported a strange smell like paint thinner. Then their vision narrowed. Then they could not breathe. A station attendant named Kazumasa Takahashi, 50 years old, picked up one of the leaking bags with his bare hands to dispose of it. He died at his post. Another attendant, Tsuneo Hishinuma, did the same. He died too. The trains kept running. Conductors did not understand what was happening. Passengers collapsed onto platforms at Kasumigaseki, at Tsukiji, at Nakanosakawa. Some lay on the pavement foaming at the mouth. Some stumbled blind into the street. Television crews arrived and filmed commuters in suits being dragged out by their armpits. Ambulances ran out. Hospitals did not know what they were treating until a doctor at St. Luke's International remembered the Matsumoto case and called out the word sarin. Hisako Hasegawa was one of the 14. The others were salarymen and station workers and a pair of subway employees who had tried to help. The youngest of the dead was in his 20s, the oldest in his 50s. Some lingered for hours. One man, Kichijiro Wada, died on the train before it even reached the next station, slumped against a window while his fellow passengers tried to wake him. Over 1,000 people were rushed to hospitals that morning. Thousands more reported symptoms for years afterward, lingering damage to vision, memory, and the nervous system that never fully healed. 2 days later, on March 22nd, more than 2,000 police officers raided the Aum compound at Kasumigaseki. They wore gas masks and carried canaries in cages to detect chemical leaks. They found laboratories, helicopters, a Russian military helicopter, stockpiles of precursor chemicals, and dozens of followers who had been confined in shipping containers. They did not find Asahara. He was hiding in a sealed room inside one of the buildings, behind a hidden door with cash, cassette tapes, and a stash of medicine. They found him 53 days later, on May 16th, sitting in the dark. The trial took 8 years. Asahara refused to mount a coherent defense. He mumbled. He fell asleep. He spoke in fragments about cosmic rays and American conspiracies. He was convicted on 13 of 17 charges and sentenced to death. 12 other members were sentenced to death alongside him. On July 6, 2018, Asahara was hanged at the Tokyo Detention House, along with 6 senior disciples. The remaining 6 were executed 3 weeks later. The cult itself did not disappear. It rebranded as Aleph. A splinter group calls itself Hikari no Wa. They still recruit, they are still monitored, they are still legal. There are questions that nobody in Japan likes to answer. Why did the police ignore the Sakamoto murder for 6 years? Why did they let Yoshiyuki Kono twist in the wind after Matsumoto? Why did a religious corporation get to build a sarin plant at the foot of the country's most sacred mountain? The answers point at something uncomfortable. Post-war Japan had built a system designed to never again let the state crush a faith. Aum walked through the door, that system held open, and started killing people on the other side. Hisako Hasegawa was 50 years old. She got on the train to go to work. A heart surgeon in a surgical mask sat down across from her, set a package wrapped in newspaper on the floor, and stood up to leave. She is not famous. None of the 14 are. They were not targets. They were proof of concept. They were the people Shoko Asahara needed to kill in order to prove that he could, so that when the apocalypse he had been promising for a decade finally arrived, his followers would still believe he had seen it coming. The apocalypse never came. He brought it with him.